Okay, so now on to the main talk of the night. I would like to introduce Kim Schlesinger. She also was a coworker of mine at Galvanize, both on the, and she also helped me a ton with students who had learning disabilities and teaching them, and also with me as myself having a learning disability, sort of working with that and curriculum design. Along with that, Kim was a co-founder of Higher Diversity and is currently a site reliability engineer at ReactiveOps. But you're not here to listen to me, so I'll give the floor to Kim.
Well, hello, my name is Kim Schlesinger, and this talk is called Refactoring for Accessibility. And the argument that I'm going to make is that an accessibility refactor will actually improve your product and your code base more effectively than a code-only refactor. And the reason I believe this is that if you are doing an accessibility audit, you're forced to interact with your product as well as look really deeply at your code. And so I'm advocating for doing that first before you do a code-only refactor. Before we dive into the details, a little bit about me. Brooke said a lot of it. I'm currently an ops engineer at a company called ReactiveOps. I'm also an educator and a software developer. Right now, the way that the education part of me is manifesting is through a conference called Develop Denver. Conference is this year, 2 days, August 15th and 16th. I'm the director of content and education. Our call for proposals is open. We would love everybody in the room to submit a talk. If you've never submitted a talk or given a talk at a conference before, a week from tonight at Flatiron School on Platt, we're giving a proposal writing workshop. So this year, from my perspective as the person who's leading education, we're trying to provide a path for all of you to learn how to write talk proposals, write and deliver really good talks. So we can spin a lot of things out of Denver. I'll get you at the very end of the talk. And then the last part that I'm going to be discussing tonight is about my work with a company called Diversity. Diversity was started 2 years ago by myself and Nina Baliga. She's the co-founder. We spun out of the Go Code Colorado competition, and once we finished the competition, we decided we wanted to come together and build a company that would create the glass door for diversity. Wanted to make the tech industry more equitable, and we wanted to give people a way to know about tech companies that were doing good things in the industry so they could go and work there. So 2 years at Diversity. A year ago, it was time for us to build our prototype to test out. I built all of that app by myself. And then once we got some validation of what was working and what wasn't working, we started bringing in a lot more developers, and we wanted to move really, really quickly. So it was my code, it was contractors' code. We eventually brought in interns to work on the code, and we very intentionally took on a lot of tech debt to move quickly. I stepped down from Diversity at the end of March, and my very last month, I said, I'm not going to work with the interns anymore. I'm not going to have any more meetings with Nina. All I want to do is refactor the app and make it better. And so the code base is good to whoever comes after me. And so I was really naive because I said, I'll spend a day or two doing an accessibility audit and making those changes, and then I'll spend the rest of my time doing like a really deep code refactor. And I found actually there was enough work to do with the accessibility refactor, and it was valuable enough that that was all I did before I left. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The roadmap of the talk, I'm going to be talking about why accessibility is important. I'm going to be talking about what is web accessibility, and then I'm going to be talking about how I learned all of this and how I made the changes that I made with the Diversity application. So let's start with why. Why web accessibility? Or why me? Actually, I'm going to start with me. I was actually really cocky about accessibility, and there were some reasons for that. I was a special education teacher. I have a master's degree in special education. I worked with kids using assistive technologies in schools, and so I was like, I feel like I have a good handle on this. I've been really interested in web accessibility. I attend the accessibility meetup in Boulder. I subscribe to the accessibility newsletter every week, and I was like, I'm like pretty well versed at this, right? I also built the app with React and styled it with React Strap, and I don't know where I got this idea, but I was like, Bootstrap like lends itself to accessible design, right? It lends itself to mobile design, but doesn't lend itself to accessibility necessarily, but I didn't realize any of that. And the reason was I was suffering from something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is a psychological phenomenon in which people of the lowest ability in a subject rate themselves as most competent compared to others. And so what happens in the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you are not a domain expert or you're not actually pursuing mastery of a domain, you think you're like pretty good at this thing because you don't actually know what good or bad looks like. And that's what was happening to me. I actually just didn't know what a well-designed app that had accessibility in mind was. So I was just a little too full of myself. That was the first problem. And if that's true of you, or if that's true of someone you know at work, like you should take that into account, because we were negatively impacting our users by me not caring enough about what accessibility is. But the other reason it's really important is we want to build an accessible web so that people can use our products. And we are, as a web development community, are doing a really bad job at that. WebAIM is an organization that's designed to provide training and tools for web developers to create accessible websites. And in February of 2019, they did a survey. They found what are the top 1 million websites in the world, and they decided they were going to go to every landing page of those million sites and do an automated accessibility audit. So they do that, and they come back with their report, and it's terrible. 97.8% of home pages had detectable WCAG2 errors, meaning they had really blatant accessibility errors. And so that means, and that was this year, February of 2019, 2.2%. That's how many home pages had no accessibility errors or failures. So we can do better as web developers. So that is the why. Like, we should be taking accessibility more seriously as web developers, and we as a community and a discipline are not doing very well. So let's go on to the what. Like, what is web accessibility really? And so I'll read you this definition, which is from the WC3. It says, web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. And yeah, it's very straightforward. I see people nodding and saying like, yeah, absolutely. So we want to be designing things that people with a range of disabilities have access to. So you might be asking yourself, how do we know when something's accessible and when it's not? And the answer to that question is standards. And I want to take a step out of web development and out of technology and actually just talk about what are standards. So this is my favorite example. So long ago, when people were measuring things, they would use their actual feet and you know, say like, what's the length of this thing? And they would walk it and they'd say, oh, it was 20 feet of my feet. And that went on for a very long time. And eventually, that unit of measurement actually needed to be standardized so that when I was talking about a foot and Michael was talking about a foot, we were actually talking about the same length. So I don't know the actual history of the length of the foot, but at some point, some organization, maybe the British government or something, said, the foot is this long. They probably literally have like a golden foot somewhere. That's the canonical foot. But it's so that everybody, when they're saying what 1 foot is, it actually means 12 inches. And so we can communicate and we mean the same thing when we're using the term feet. And that's the same thing with web standards. So the body that governs web standards is called the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C for short. And the goal of that organization is that the things that we use to build the web, HTML, CSS, the DOM, that when we use something from one of those languages, like an HTML tag, that it means the same thing on my computer when I'm using the Chrome browser versus Brooks's computer when he's using, what do you use, Brave, Brooks?
I use Firefox and Chrome and Safari. I use them.
Great. So we want the web to be rendered in the same way across computers and across different browsers, and the term for that is interoperability. So the WC, or the W3C, their goal is interoperability between different types of computers and browsers. And so I mentioned some of these, but the W3C is responsible for the standards that define these things, which we're familiar with. And it's also responsible for the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's currently 2 versions out, version 2.0 and 2.1. The goal of the WCAG is encapsulated in the acronym POUR, and it's perceivable, the words, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So that anyone with a disability, whether they're deaf or they're visually impaired or they have to use a special keyboard, has access and can understand the patterns that you're using on your website. These are how the guidelines look. They actually are just like a list of requirements, and then there are success criteria that are defined. The guideline docs are pretty overwhelming. You can unfold a lot of these things, and there's a lot of text. And so in general, the way that we as web developers apply the guidelines is we use checklists. And so, yeah, that was my approach. Like, I'm gonna use one of the WCAG checklists and try and improve the accessibility of the diversity site. So what we just covered is, what is accessibility? You wanna make apps that are available for use by anyone, and how is accessibility defined? Standards from the WC3. There are other standards and guidelines. One that you've probably heard of is Section 508, and that's specifically for US government websites. I'm not actually gonna cover any of those standards. Some of them overlap with WCAG, some of them don't. All right, now we're gonna get into how, and in this part, I'm actually just gonna show you what tools did I use, how did I use it with the diversity website, and what changes did I make based on that tool. And the big lesson I want you to know about this is there is no one tool to rule them all. There's not one accessibility audit that you can run and you are good to go. You have to make use of a lot of different tools. And if you're gonna start with one, I highly recommend this one. It's called the Wave extension. And can you see that? I can't expand it. I can also just show you. Okay. Cool. So this was the staging site for diversity when I ran the Wave extension. And so the Wave tool was written by WebAIM, that organization that builds these types of tools. And you can get a browser extension, and you can enable the browser extension, and it will scan the site that you're on, and it'll tell you, here are WCAG errors, here are some warnings, and it'll also say, here are some things that you're doing well. So we can just take a look at this video, maybe. Okay, I will show you. Okay, so this is the actual diversity site as it is right now. And up here in the corner, I have the Wave extension enabled. And it actually just shows you on each element what it's looking at and the things that it's looking for. And then if you go here to the summary, this is where all of the really good stuff is. And so I have 1 error, 15 alerts, 10 features, 15 structural elements, and more. If you click on the flag and you unfold it, it'll actually tell you what the error or the warnings are. And then if you click on the information, it will tell you, it'll give you the WCAG standard of what the error is and how to fix it. And so it's an amazing tool, and this is essentially the tool that they use to do the WebAIM Million. So when I originally ran the diversity application through the Wave audit, the thing that was causing the most errors was a lack of alternative text, which is a really easy fix. And so if you look at the site, we have companies who create profiles and they upload their logos. And so there are lots of logos all over here. Oh, did you see the apostrophe job listing?
That's an old logo.
That's right. So alt text, that was the thing that I needed to fix. And here's what was happening. Diversity app is a React app. And I had created this company profile card component. And you can see here where the alt text is, it just says logo. So every single logo just said logo when the screen reader read it. And we want to be more specific. So it was pretty simple. What I did was I used JavaScript template literals. So that's the backticks if you don't know it. And we were getting all the data from the company, from the props. And so we just said, hey, give me the name, and we'll say logo. So then instead of just saying logo, when the screen reader would go to the logo, it would say apostrophe logo or salt logo or whatever it was. So the big takeaway here is use JavaScript template literals to dynamically populate alt text for your images. It's not too hard. Most of my errors for the page were as a result of that, and it was not a technically challenging fix. I was able to do it quickly. So the Wave extension is the first tool I recommend you start with. But then there's this other mix of tools that was really outstanding. And so they're checklist, exemplars, meaning websites that do this well, and Screenreaders. And so the first thing I want to show you is the ally checklist. So let's go to that. So after fixing the alt text, I was like, I trust the accessibility organization, and so I'm just going to go to their checklist, and they have redone it recently. But the thing that stuck out to me at the time was provide a skip link and make sure that it's visible when focused. And so when I realized what this is designed for users who are using screen readers. And basically, as the screen reader is going through the navigation, your navigation is usually the same every view that you show. You should provide a way for someone who's using a screen reader to click on something that says skip to the main content. And so this is another thing that you should do, is learn how to use your screen reader. And so I had to learn how to use my screen reader. So Macs come with a built-in screen reader, and I have a touch bar, and the way that I engage the screen reader is I triple click the button. So, and can you hear that? Cool. All right, I also learned this the hard way. On a Mac, screen readers only work with Safari. So I was using Firefox and Chrome for a long time, and I was like, why can't I get this screen reader to read what I want it to? I had to use Safari. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. And this ties into the other thing, which is you want to find websites that do this well, so you can just copy what they do. So this is Eric Bailey's website. He's a really well-known accessibility advocate. And so I'm using my screen reader. Oh, that's too far. All right. I am really bad with the screen reader, so forgive me. Okay, go back up here. All right. You're gonna have to bear with me. There it is. Okay. So if you see up top, it's hidden from sighted users, but yeah, there you go. So if you click enter, and you can't really tell here, but it drops you right into the main content instead of having to use the screen reader to go through everything. His is actually broken, but he also has the accessibility feedback, or if you hit it, it sends you to a page where you can give him feedback. So what I did was I instituted that for diversity. Yep. And so created the skip to main content. Is that Safari? Yes. And then an accessibility statement. I will show you that in just a moment. So, all right. So provide a skip to main content link. It's really simple if you're using component-based architecture. You can just build a nice small component that does this. And so here's how I built mine. I created a component called skipNav, and it will skip to, it's an anchor tag that will skip to the main content, and it'll drop you down into that. This also had the accessibility statement hidden in it in case somebody wanted to read that. This is how I styled it. There's sort of two well-known CSS patterns for this particular thing. I literally asked on the topic accessibility channel of Denver Devs and got some really good responses. The thing that you also have to do is in the main section of your HTML, you have to have an ID that is called section main for this to work, so that once you hit that anchor tag, it knows where to go. So as we discussed, skip navigation links create a way for people using screen readers to skip to the main content of your page so they don't have to listen to your nav forever and ever. And if you're using a JS framework, just make this a component, and then you can easily just drop in skip nav before your navigation bar. So again, using multiple tools to identify issues, I showed you the Wave extension tool, which is very powerful. I also tried to show you, it's actually kind of messy, but you have to use a lot of different tools, a screen reader, a checklist, and like sites that do it well to find some other things that you could do to improve the accessibility of your site. The second thing that I want you to start thinking about is, instead of I should look for my alt tags and see if they're populated, or I should institute a skip to the main nav bar, instead, I think you should adopt a mindset or a process where you commit to accessibility being an ongoing process and not just a one-time fix. And so one way to do this is an accessibility statement, and I think these are really cool. So this is that skip nav component that I showed you. And then we talked about it just a little bit, but I added a new thing, and it was our accessibility statement for diversity. So let's look at diversity's accessibility statement. So what this is we're just describing what we are trying to do in terms of building an accessible experience, and I'm just going to read this out loud to you. It says, accessibility statement. Diversity is committed to creating an accessible user experience for people with disabilities. We are striving to meet the standards described in the WCAG 2.0 checklist level A. The code that generates this application is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Any person using a browser that honors these standards should be able to navigate the site. In addition to being tested on multiple browsers, this site has been checked for screen reader ease of use using VoiceOver. It was also checked using Wave, the web accessibility audit tool. We are aware of the access issues with our login modal, and we are working to address the problem. Please let us know if you encounter other accessibility barriers by emailing us or sending us a direct message on Twitter. And so I really like this because you just say what you've done. We've audited it with these tools. We actually know there's errors and we're actively working on it. And so one thing that's problematic about our site is we use auth0, and the login is this modal, and it's really hard for screen readers to navigate this. And it's been a tricky problem, and we're working on it and we're aware of it, but we also just want to acknowledge that we know about it. So if you have an accessibility statement in this way, you're just showing your users this is how we care about accessibility. You provide them with information about the accessibility of your content, and you're demonstrating that commitment to accessibility and your social responsibility. So if you have the power at your company to develop one of these, I highly recommend it. And I showed you the examples. Eric Bailey, which was that site that I was showing you, also has a really good accessibility statement. Well, so the argument that I'm making in this talk is that an accessibility refactor will improve your product and your code base more effectively than a code-only refactor. I'm not asking you to stop doing your really powerful code refactoring practices. I just think this particular way of looking at your product and looking at your code forces you to be a little bit more empathetic. It forces you to think about different users, and it's going to make your application and ultimately your code better, because you're going to have to be working in your code and thinking about how it works. So if you're in the audience, you're wondering, well, what can I do? So if you work at a company, find ways to discuss accessibility with people in positions of leadership. And if you are at a company, offer to lead lunch and learns about the topic. If you're in school, ask your instructor when you're covering accessibility in the curriculum. If it's not covered, respectfully ask why not, and then give a lightning talk or a lesson about the topic. And then everyone, you should attend the Front Range Accessibility and Inclusive Design meetup in Boulder. It is outstanding. It's a very, very good meetup, and I think it kind of gives that different perspective that you get looking at things through the lens of accessibility. Subscribe to the, it's A11Y, but it's accessibility, weekly newsletter. And then come to Develop Denver. So now I'm shamelessly pitching the conference that I help organize. But the reason I'm shamelessly pitching it is that if you've been to Develop Denver in the past, we've never done this before. So this year we're trying something new where we've selected some featured talks, some people who are definitely going to give talks. And one of my favorite talk submissions was this one by Crystal Preston Watson, who is a local accessibility expert. I am not an expert, but she is giving a talk about how to develop accessible mobile applications. So that's one talk that will definitely be at Develop Denver, as well as another talk by Lita Keen, who's an instructor at Turing, where she's going to be talking about color and accessibility. And so we have a lot of accessibility content at Develop Denver, and hopefully we'll have more. We already have some talk submissions that are going to get voted on that are related to accessibility. So to recap what we talked about why thinking about accessibility is important. You might also be experiencing the Dunning-Kruger effect, thinking that you know more about it than you do. That's okay, me too. But also just developing applications and thinking about users with disabilities is gonna make your applications better for everybody. We talked about what it means to be accessible, those WCAG standards, and using checklists to evaluate your accessibility, as well as how. So the Wave extension tool, the Ally checklist, and get to know the screen reader that's built into your machine. Cool. I will not say that again. Well, actually, the last thing I will say is please start insisting that your organization develop accessible applications. And again, 2.2% of websites are accessible, fully accessible, and we can do better. So I will post this in the meetup channel and on Twitter, but these are some really outstanding resources. Again, Crystal Preston Watson, local person, is an accessibility expert, so if you can see her talk, do it. Any questions? Alex.
Just in our own attempts to try to be more accessible, we came across the difference between like single A, double A, and triple A.
Yeah.
Is there like recommendation for what to support?
Yeah, so the question is, the WCAG has checklists or ways you can be compliant, and there's single A, double A, and triple A. I'm not an expert on this, but single A has the least requirements, and triple A has the most requirements. And so if you're new to it, start with single A. And the accessibility statement for diversity, we are striving to meet the requirements on WCAG 2.0 single A. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you know if Google takes accessibility into account?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do you know if Google takes accessibility, is it like a core part of how they develop things? I don't know. I assume they have a wing of people for whom that's their expertise, but that's a good question.
Do they like natively in their search algorithm? Is that something that they take into account?
Oh, I don't know. That's a great question. For SEO, is accessibility a consideration of how things are ranked?
I don't think it will matter.
Yeah.
Until that happens.
That is blowing my mind, Michael Herman. Yeah, Michael said, for those of you who are listening, that it probably won't matter unless, like, people won't take it seriously or businesses won't take it seriously until it's impacting your SEO. So that's a really good observation.
From what I've heard, is they don't get as crazy as like Aria, but they will do you for alt tags, a lot of the stuff that's been out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar now that you say it.
Minuscule, I'm sure, compared to your authority.
Let's do Michael and then Berto.
Michael. As not an accessibility expert, maybe either. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. One thing I've always been fascinated about when somebody told me about the differing competency levels, even with something like a screen reader, that skill level with a technology is different, just as you might assume, like, oh, I'm great at a computer, somebody might not, or a regular reading. I'm curious if you had any knowledge, insight, or anything to say about different competency levels, even in technologies that we, as sighted auditory users, might not even be thinking of.
Sure. So the question is, how can tools that were originally designed for people with disabilities help anyone?
Sure.
Yeah. I don't have a big sweeping answer, but I will tell you at work, at my current job, I'm new to ops work, and I have to do a lot of reading, and I'm generally exhausted at the end of the day because it's just a lot of cognitive processing for me. At the end of the day, I will often use a screen reader to read things. So it's like a slightly different experience for me, but I think because I'm tired or because I need that assistance, that I've started using a screen reader in that way. So yeah. Berto, and then we will cut off the questions, but we can talk. So Berto, then Brooks.
I was just curious about the ARIA you just mentioned too. It sounded it was a standard for W3C, something standardized. What is it exactly?
Yeah, so ARIA is a part of, I don't know if it's, oh no, it is part of the standards. And it's a way of describing HTML tags even more semantically. Actually, I think as HTML is developing, it's more semantic, and so ARIA is less necessary. somebody asked me about it earlier in the week, and I looked it up, and it's we as sighted users can just perceive the way that content is organized because we know the main content's generally in the middle of the page, and then there's the aside, and there's an aside tag, but it's a way of adding even more context that the screen reader will read, so that the screen reader can say, like, this is the main part, or like, this is secondary, so maybe the person using the screen reader like skips over it.
Like through HTML attributes, or?
Yes, it is in a HTML. It's like, it's role equals whatever role is. Yeah. All right, since Brooks is the organizer, he gets to override my 2 questions.
Which is good because we have a couple questions from the chat.
Oh, wow.
So HoaxAX asks, I'm currently making a website for a scholarship I won, and I want the website to have accessibility, but I don't know React. Should I learn through HTML tags, or is there a way in JavaScript?
Oh.
I never really learned that in school.
Cool, so the question is, I want to build a site that has some accessibility features, and I don't know React. That's fine. You can just use vanilla HTML and CSS. You don't even have to have JavaScript. It's more about HTML, actually, creating semantic HTML, labeling it with ARIA tags, and then building those things like the skip nav that doesn't require React. That requires HTML and CSS.
And there was a follow-up, which was, is accessibility different from browser to browser?
Is accessibility different browser to browser? Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. I would say probably not, based on the standard, being that like there's this one thing that accessibility means for the WCAG, and it's intended to create standardization across browsers. So a browser might use a screen reader differently, but the way that it's accessible is probably the same across browsers.
I have a question.
Cool, go for it.
There's something because you add is that because I am deaf, and for some people to make a YouTube video, and they use the automatic caption, and the YouTube they're not perfect. That was the most frustrating about a lot of the deaf people. So it would be a lot better to manually translate.
Oh, okay.
There are the main video coding, everything I want to watch, but I don't have that opportunity. So keep that in mind when you make a video manually, or read the caption, make sure it's correct all the way through.
So if you're watching the video, there's somebody here who's deaf, and he said that the captions that are automatically generated on YouTube are not very good, especially for coding specific technologies. So to make your YouTube videos more accessible, look into doing the captions yourself or editing the captions that are generated through the machine. Also, I would like you to know that John is a developer at Diversity, and so he's working on the application now after I've left. So if you would like an introduction, I would love to introduce you to him. Cool, so you can contact me. I think I know, I personally know a lot of you, but really, Develop Denver. Even if you don't want to give a talk at Develop Denver, come to our talk proposal workshop, and you can learn how to write a talk proposal. That's all that you'll do that night. All right, thank you.